Good evening, everyone. I'm Deb Henneberry of the 99's Webinar Committee, and I welcome you to tonight's presentation, Vancouver 2024, Thinking About Flying into Canada. I'd like to take a moment to thank the sponsor of tonight's webinar, SiriusXM. Tonight, we are joined by the 99's Vice President, Minnetta Gardinier, who will be telling us about how to fly into Vancouver for this summer's international conference. Minnetta is a retired university researcher, teacher, and administrator. Minnetta has over 20 years of GA flying experience and holds a single-engine land private and instrument rating. She's a self-proclaimed Air Race Classic addict. Minnetta has held several section and chapter leadership positions and has attended many international conferences. She has hosted the 2019 Dayton and 2023 Jordan conferences. And now I will hand things over to Minnetta Gardinier.
Greetings, and thanks very much for the introduction there, Deb. And this is my trusty Cardinal that I fly here in the picture. I've flown many races with it. And it has gone back and forth to Canada several times, mainly because my plane partner is from Canada, he and his wife. So it routinely goes into Canada multiple times during the year. And in 2019, I was on the Air Race Classic board and put together a race route that went into Canada into Ontario. So that was kind of where I got my personal experience flying into Canada and back. And I might reference that a couple of times during the evening. So let's get on with it. And what I'm hoping is that people will consider flying to Vancouver this year later in July. And so the question is, would we get a gaggle of planes together to go into Canada? It's not that different from flying in the US. So I'm going to give you a lot of details tonight, and I hope that I will point out that many of the things are quite similar for flying between the US versus Canada. So it's not that different. And again, it's not rocket science. We're all pilots, and this is a great opportunity to kind of stretch your wings a bit. And this little nugget at the bottom is just to remind everybody. So we're all of us here in the U.S. are used to reading and dealing with the federal aviation regulations, or what we kindly call the FARs. And Canada has a very similar set of documents. They're referred to as the Canadian Aviation Regulations, or CARS. So if you want a little bit different reading, you could explore the CARS online if you like. What I want to do tonight is to kind of go through kind of things in the following format. So I'll go through several slides that are kind of what you need to get put together in order before you travel. So looking at it from the perspective of what do you need for yourself as a pilot and any passengers you might have. What does their airplane need? What's involved in clearing customs, both on the US and the Canada side. And we'll talk a little bit about charts and services for flying into Canada. And then we'll kind of get down into more of the weeds in terms of, okay, if you're leaving Canada or leaving the US and you're hopping the border, what's involved in preparing to leave the US, what's involved in your arrival into Canada, clearing customs in Canada. If you're in Vancouver and you've jumped through all the hoops to get your plane ready to go and for you to travel in Canada, maybe you want to consider taking a hop somewhere in Canada beyond Vancouver once the conference is over, or come in early. And then also, what do you have to do to get back into the US? So that's kind of the nuts and bolts of what we're going to go through this evening. All right, so what does the pilot need to carry? Everything on this slide are things that you probably should already have. So proof of citizenship, you should have a passport. Hopefully a lot of you went to Jordan this past year and you already got your passport in order. But again, this is a reminder, it needs to be valid for 6 months beyond your travel in Canada. You'll need a pilot certificate, and on the back side of your pilot certificate, it generally says you're showing your proficiency, shows that you have proficiency in the English language again, which is the language for flying around not only the US, but outside of the US. A valid medical certificate. So everybody here should have a valid medical certificate of some sort. Now, the thing that you need to pay attention to is that for Canada, you need to have a class 3 or better medical certificate. Canada does not recognize basic med. And there is no way to get an exception to that. When I put the route together, for example, in 2019 to go into Canada for the air race, we tried to get a waiver, if you will, and there are no waivers to be had in this regard. So the way to get around that, and the way that we navigated that for the air race, because in the air race, you have to have a pilot and a co-pilot. So we told our teams, our prospective race teams, that if you want to race and you're on basic med, which we do allow racers to race on basic med in the air race, but for flying in Canada, then one person, either the pilot or the co-pilot, had to have a 3rd class or better. So my recommendation is, if you're interested in flying into Vancouver for this conference and you fly on basic med, bring along a co-pilot who has a 3rd class medical or better, and they would be the ones to, on the records, be the pilot when you're flying in Canada. So the other thing to note is that recreational and sport licenses are also not valid in Canada. So again, 3rd class or better medical. And then this is the item here at the very bottom of this slide that is something that a lot of people will have to do to make this trip. And that is that this is an FCC, so it's not required by the FAA, but it is required by the US and by the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, that if you fly outside of the US, if you're a US pilot, and within the US, you do not need this FCC operator's permit. But if you fly outside the country, you are required to have an FCC, what's called a restricted radio telephone operator's permit. And you can get one for $35, and it's good for life. So, I purchased mine back when I did the race up in Canada. So we'll talk more about this FCC requirement again in a few minutes. So again, these are things that you pretty much already have, except for this FCC license, perhaps. And if you're carrying passengers going up into Canada, everyone in the plane has to have their passports. All of their passports, again, have to be valid for 6 months beyond the travel in Canada. And this is also because you're crossing the border. If you happen to be traveling with a child, now not many will, but if you happen to be bringing a child with you and you're the only parent that's in the plane with the child, you want to bring a notarized statement along that's signed by the absent parent that travel is approved and includes your travel dates. So again, this is a recommendation. This is a recommendation for crossing the border, whether it's in an airplane or a car going into Canada. So now we're going to shift over and look at the airplane requirements. So the FAA, again, most of these things you should already have. So your FAA airworthiness certificate, you want to make sure you bring that along. I fly a Cardinal. That's a regular certificated airplane. It's not an experimental aircraft, but if you are flying an experimental aircraft, there is a document, which is here down in italics, the standardized validation of a special airworthiness certificate for experimental. This is a document that you can download from Transport Canada's website, and you'll just carry that in the plane. There's an agreement between the US that allows you to do that if you have, again, a copy of your airworthiness document from the FAA. Transport Canada is kind of the equivalent of FAA in Canada. So when I refer to Transport Canada, that's what that's referencing. So you want to have a registration certificate that you carry in the plane normally. Operating limitations information, so your POH, your handbook for the aircraft. Weight and balance document, again, all things that you should have already. The other piece is if you're going to fly a plane that's owned by another person or an entity, let's say it's a rental plane, it's recommended that you carry along a notarized letter authorizing your trip into Canada, and again, include the dates. That's just if you don't own the aircraft that you're flying in into the Vancouver area with. More things that are on your plane that you're used to is an ID data plate that's sitting there on your plane. Mine, I believe, is on towards the tail of the plane. Just a little data plate there. Here's something that is important. So if you read the rules, if you read the AOPA website that has all the information for flying into Canada on it, it'll say that you have to have these 12-inch registration marks. That's your N number. So many of you fly a plane that have these big 12-inch numbers. Again, this is my airplane. It's a photo from an air race. This number on the nose, my race number, is 18 inches tall. And back here are that's my N number back there. And those numbers are like 2 or 3 inches tall. And so what we discovered when we were organizing for the race is that, yes, they have this rule that you have to have 12-inch registration marks. However, if your plane has small numbers, like my Cardinal, that meet the FAA rules, and typically these are planes that were manufactured before 1983, then Transport Canada accepts them. There is an agreement that allows small numbers. And again, this plane goes back and forth to Canada multiple times a year. You know, our registration marks have never been questioned. Again, it's because it's a 78, so it was made prior to this 1983. So if your plane happens to have small numbers, don't worry about it. You should be fine going into Canada. You're required to have a transponder with a mode C, and you're required to have, an emergency locator transmitter. So the ELT can be either 121.5 or a 406 megahertz. So again, these are pretty standard things that people's planes should have. The next thing you'll need to purchase separate for flying in Canada is what's called a CBP decal. And so that's the US Customs and Border Protection. This is an image of a decal here. And those are good for a calendar year, and they cost just under $35. That's the current cost for them, I believe. And you can buy them online. It may take some time for them, a few weeks for it to get sent out to you. So if you're going to do this, the sooner you put in and purchase one of these, the better, so that you get it in time. And this decal actually sits up here on our plane. We affix it. We stick it to this center post that's between the two windows. So it's under the wing, and it's right by the pilot's door. So you want to make sure you have that stuck on your plane before you cross the border. And I think we have a little bit more, and then we're going to take a break for some questions. So again, if you have questions, make sure you put them into the chat, and we'll take a little bit of a break shortly to answer any questions. The next thing you want to make sure is your insurance. So everybody, I think, should have insurance. You want to contact your insurance agent just to be sure that your coverage extends, allowing you to travel into Canada. Generally, I don't think that should be an issue. Canada does have a requirement that you have to carry a certain minimum amount of liability insurance, and you have to be able to show evidence that you have this insurance. And these are the limits that they have. And so if your plane is, again, this is based on the gross takeoff weight, up to 2,300 pounds, you have to carry at least $100,000 for public liability. If the aircraft is between 2,300 and 5,000, then you have to carry 500,000. And then if you have a bigger plane, you have to carry $1 million public liability plus 300,000 per passenger. And I think the average GA plane is going to fall in this range down of the up to 2,300 or perhaps the 2,300 up to 5,000. So, but again, it's all based on how much the plane weighs as to how much public liability insurance you need to carry on the plane. And now we're going to go back to the FCC. So again, traveling within the US, if that's all you travel is within the US, you don't have to have a radio telephone operator's permit, and you don't have to carry a radio station license. If you cross the border, then you are required to carry these items. And so the first thing, again, there are 2 licenses. One is the operator's license, that's you, the pilot. The other is the radio station license, that's the equipment. And so this has actually changed a bit since I flew to Canada in 2019. And the good news is it costs less, believe it or not. So for the restricted radio telephone operator's permit, again, it's good for life. Once you buy it, it's good forever. If you lose it, you can actually just go online and print out a new one. Again, it's for the pilot. It's $35 to cover the application fee. There's actually a really good video that I found in putting this talk together that tells you, you can watch a video and it'll tell you how to do this online. And I've referenced that at the end. The next thing is a little more complicated in terms of it's the radio station license. So the code for it is AC. Again, it has to do with the radio equipment that's on your plane. And so there's a $35 application fee. And you have to pay for that application fee separately from the radio telephone operator's permit. So you'd have to pay this application fee twice. So when you go to get the station license, it's $35. And then there's typically a $100 regulatory fee. And that's good for 10 years. So if you're going to fly multiple times to Canada, you know, this might be your first time, but you think you might go back to Canada, then you might want to go ahead and purchase this license. Again, it's good for 10 years. The good news here is if you're going to make this trip, and it's a one-time trip into Canada for you, we can help you obtain what's called a special temporary authority, which is kind of a waiver. I shouldn't call it a fee waiver. I just talked to the FCC today, but it's a waiver that gives you basically a short-term authorization to make your trip. And this special temporary authority, this STA, can be granted for a period no longer than 180 days. So reflecting back towards the Air Race Classic, and this is where I found out about the STA, is we obtained for that air race an STA, and I put together a template letter, which the racers could then take that template and attach it to their application to get this station license. And basically that allows you to waive, you don't have to pay the $100. You still have to pay $35 because you're still submitting your application. You'll submit your application and you will attach to that application this template letter that I'll put together and provide to people that are going up into Canada. And we will limit the time, the template for the radio station license to get this waiver will be limited. I think I'll set it up to be like the 1st of June, and it'll be good through the 15th of August, which allows you to actually go to the conference. And if you want to put a trip on either side of that, it'll give you room to do that. But again, you'll just that's pretty much a done deal. I just have to put the letter together. I've talked to the FCC. They said we're eligible to do that. Again, this is for a one-time trip up into Canada and then back home to the US. And so it would be $35 to get the station license. And again, you have to attach the STA, and I'll get the document. We'll post the document, or you can email me for the document. But we'll take care of that. So that's good news that I have to report on that. So again, that's the FCC stuff. So when you go, the steps that you'll do to get your operator's license and to submit for the station license STA is you'll go to the FCC website. You'll click on basically licensing and databases and select cores. That is a basic, that'll allow you to set up your FCC account. So you'll create a username and a password. And then you'll go into that account and request a registration number. And they'll just send that to you by email. All of this gets done by email. It's pretty quick. I don't think there's really any little waiting time for this. Once you get your FCC registration number, then you can go back onto the site, again, going back to licensing and databases area, and you'll select what's called the Universal Licensing Site. So again, this is the ability to file online for your operator's permit or your radio station license. And then you'll use that FRN number to log in on the site, and then you'll look for Form 605. And that's the form that you need to fill out to get these licenses and or the STA, the waiver request. And that is more than a mouthful, so I'm going to take a little bit of a break. If anybody has questions, I'm happy to try to answer those. We can go back to some of the slides if you want to take a quick look at something again.
Yeah, we got a couple of questions in the chat. Someone's asking if it's okay, they have 3-inch numbers on newer experimental aircraft with the form. Is that all right?
My understanding is that if the FAA has approved your numbers, then Transport Canada will recognize that approval. So I'm not familiar with experimental aircraft, and maybe somebody else can comment, or the person who wrote the question can comment if those numbers, have the numbers been approved by the FAA. But it's my understanding, the basic premise is that if the FAA has approved it, Transport Canada will accept it.
Okay. When I got my license, I had to get a RR. Is it still valid?
Yes, so that's the RR, that's the restricted radio telephone operator's permit or license. It is good forever. If you've lost it, you'll probably want to, you may need to go onto the FCC website and log in to get a copy of it.
And then a follow-up to the previous question from the person who was asking. Numbers are FAA approved for our 2023 in the US.
Say that again.
Oh, the numbers are FAA approved for, I guess, as of 2023 in the US.
Oh, that's on the experimental aircraft
Yes,
question.
previous question.
Yeah, so again, my understanding is that if the FAA has approved it, then Transport Canada will accept it. And so what you'd probably want to do is travel with something that will show that approval or show that the aircraft is approved with those numbers.
Okay. If a corporation, separate question, not experimental.
Yeah.
If a corporation owns the airplane, but I own the corporation, do I need a notarized letter to authorize the trip?
Yeah, so so I'm going to back up some of this stuff. So the answer is yes. My aircraft, that Cardinal that you saw, so I co-own it with another guy here in Iowa City, and it is under Sapphire Vistas LLC. So technically, I should travel to Canada with a notarized letter showing that my plane partner and I agree that the plane goes up there. Yeah, that's the correct response to that question.
Okay. And then we did get one other question, just regarding if these slides are going to be shared afterwards, because I know there's a lot of good information in here so far with more to come. All our webinars are posted on both the 99's website and also on our YouTube channel. So it usually takes just about a week or so to have this edited and posted. So I would say by not this weekend, but the following weekend, if there's anything that you want to revisit. Again, you don't have to log into the 99's website. You can just go to webinars from the homepage, and you should see this there. And then likewise, our YouTube channel. And those are all the questions that we got so far.
Okay. Let's go on. So I will say that before I go on, this FCC website, it is kind of it is a little confusing to navigate it. I mean, if you think the FAA is confusing, I'm going to tell you the FCC site is a bit confusing to navigate. But the video that I reference for doing the radio operator's license was a very good video in terms of the site has been updated and there are improvements to it. So I think it's a little easier to navigate than it was, but I just want to forewarn you on that. And if you have any questions, people are free. Please feel free to contact me with questions, and I can try to help. All right, so we did the questions. The next thing I want to go into is survival gear. So again, this kind of came up with the air race. It's really helpful to find out how to fly in Canada. But it comes back to a question: is do you fly with any survival gear in your plane here in the States? And like the air race actually decided to implement a rule. So Canada requires that survival gear is carried in the plane, flat out. Canada has that requirement. And that caused the air race group to kind of think about this. And actually in our air races now, down here in the States, where they don't go outside of the country, they implemented a rule that you do have to carry some basic survival gear in the plane. And needless to say, it's good practice. And many of you hopefully already do carry some survival gear in your plane. But again, I want you to be aware that Canada does require that you carry some survival gear in the plane. And this is how it's stated. The survival gear must be sufficient for the survival on the ground of each person on board, given the geographical area, the season of the year, and anticipated seasonal climatic variations. That's how it reads. And clearly, flying in Canada, flying to Vancouver, is very different from flying to the Yukon territories, or when I flew over Canada going to Greenland a few years ago. There's a lot of very remote areas. So again, flying to Vancouver is very different. So again, it's kind of based on what the geographical area is like. Are you flying in the summer? Are you flying in the dead of winter? Those kinds of things. And again, the basic requirement in the Canadian regulations is that the gear that you travel with must provide the means for starting a fire, AKA matches. Providing shelter could be as simple as, the picture of that silver emergency blanket or whatever. Could be a small tent if you wanted. Providing or purifying water. So bring a few bottles of water in the plane with you, and visually signaling distress. So I've, kind of pulled out a picture here, of a little camping reflecting mirror. There could be a strobe light, a flashing strobe light that you carry. But again, this is more, so it is a requirement to fly in Canada with survival gear. It's also to make you think about, what should I carry in the plane when I fly, whether it's here in Iowa City, around the state of Iowa, or, flying out to Vancouver. So just something for you to think about. So now we're going to shift. We're going to talk about navigation charts, Nav Canada. So probably all of you, many of you have heard that flying in Canada is different from the US in the sense that you pay for services that you use when you fly in Canada. And that's how they pay for their aviation services up there. So you're going to want to have navigation charts, both US and Canada. You can actually obtain paper Nav Canada Canadian charts through Aircraft Spruce. Those are available that way. What's depicted here with some images is, so this is the VFR navigation chart, or what's referred to as VNC there. You can see it's kind of pretty similar format to what we have here. This would be equivalent to our typical VFR charts in the US. What you see as a watermark on this slide is kind of and also on this map are the tiles for the various areas. So the Vancouver map is down here in the lower right-hand corner, lower left-hand corner. The map up here, which I've got it kind of hiding behind, is the VFR terminal area, or the VTA chart, which that's kind of equivalent to our TAC charts if you're flying near a big airport area. Not depicted here is an IFR. You can also buy IFR low en route charts. And then finally, the Canada Flight Supplement, which is similar to our what used to be called AFDs. I'm not even sure what they're called now. But again, this has all your aerodrome and flight planning info. And so I've used the term aerodrome here because that's the term that's utilized up in Canada in terms of, think about these small airports that you might fly into. They're referred to as aerodromes up there. And so here's another piece of information for you to take note of. Can we do a quick hand count? How many people that are on this that use ForeFlight? Ballpark number. Can you get that for me? Maybe Deb, I'll let you kind of pull that together while I'm talking. I just want to get a sense of how many people use ForeFlight.
Looks like 5, 6.
Okay, and how many are on the?
You got 7 out of 33, which so it's okay. Not including you and me. 7. Oh, there we go. 9 out of 33. Okay,
so if you fly with ForeFlight, you can do an add-on to your ForeFlight, your US ForeFlight, for $100 a year for 1 year subscription. So you could contact ForeFlight online, say I want to add Canada. It's $100 add-on to your subscription. It's good for a year. I actually reached out to ForeFlight to ask if they would consider providing a short-term subscription, complimentary subscription for Canada as an add-on for people. And I just got a reply back today that they are considering it. They would like to know how many people would actually, use it, go into Canada. But they are considering it as a possibility. So it's possible that I might be able to get this ForeFlight Canada added as a complimentary short-term thing that might be only good for like 1 month or 2 months type thing. The other thing I will say is that the other way we'll navigate this, or that I would say to navigate this, is that you can, I'm like 99.9% sure that this is how it works. You can add Canada as an add-on to your subscription for $100. You could fly to Vancouver and back home. And, let's say it's 2 weeks after you opened up that subscription, and you can contact ForeFlight and cancel it. And they will not give you your money back per se, but they will prorate the amount that was used. They'll say, okay, well, you had it for a month, and we're going to prorate it, and we'll give you 11 months worth of that $100 and add it to your subscription. They'll extend your US subscription. So that's in a short-term way. I believe that it will work for the ForeFlight Canada. So there are a couple options for how that'll work. I'm still communicating with them They asked me to get an idea of about how many people we thought would request this. So, and if you get For Flight Canada, then you get all of this documentation. You get all of these charts. You get the Canada Flight Supplement. You get all kinds of, the same kinds of information that you get for U.S. airports. So, it's pretty handy, needless to say. Another question, what if you need maintenance up in Canada? So there is an agreement that's been on the books for quite some time that the US, so the FAA and Canada, meaning Transport Canada, they actually have a bilateral aviation safety agreement on maintenance implementation. So US planes, if you go up into Canada and you need maintenance, you can get it done as long as it's being done at a Transport Canada certified station. My plane's gone up to Canada. We've had maintenance done up there. It's not a problem. Likewise, again, it's a reciprocal agreement. So Canadian planes that come down here, if they need maintenance, they can go to a U.S. Shop, an FAA certified shop here in the U.S. And so this is described on an advisory circular that I've mentioned here. So again, this is just to let you know, if you get up there and you need some maintenance, it's not going to be difficult to get maintenance done up there, or problematic in any way. And then lastly, these are a few miscellaneous thoughts, things that came up that we discovered, when we were putting the race together. And I went back and they're still true today. So if you happen to travel and you're going to travel with a firearm, bottom line is you have to declare it when you clear customs in Canada. So there are some rifles and shotguns, the kinds that are used for sport, competition, or survival, that are allowed, but you have to declare them. And then there are some restricted firearms that if you want to carry them up there, you're going to need to get a permit before you travel. So again, I don't know how many people travel with a gun in their plane, but be aware of this. The other thing that is also true is that Canada actually has strict DUI laws. And if you have a prior DUI, that may restrict your ability to enter Canada. And actually the US and Canada do share information on DUI stuff. So just be aware of that. Another thing is cannabis or marijuana is legal in Canada, but it's actually illegal to cross the border with it in any form. So just be aware of that. And these are just kind of some miscellaneous things to be aware of. And I have another break in here if there's any questions on any of this stuff.
Yeah, you got a few more. Going back to the survival gear,
Sure.
one of our listeners said that they seem to recall needing an axe with a long handle. Is this an old rule?
I think that's an old rule, or if it may be, yeah, definitely. It's not a rule that I'm aware of. It was definitely, we were pretty careful about looking at the requirements for survival gear with regards to the air race. And yeah, I don't recall that being a rule.
Okay, and then regarding DUIs,
let me back up. So the one thing to keep in mind is that if that is a rule, it's probably required in like very remote areas. I mean, because keeping in mind that the survival gear that you're expected to carry should be relevant to the areas you're traveling in. And but the very most basic things that were required are what's listed here: fire, shelter, water, and signaling for distress.
That's a good point, yeah. Regarding DUIs, the law that was last checked was 9 years post last probation date and a letter from the provincial government allowing you in. Someone had an ex that had to deal with that.
So is that somebody from the US that's commenting on that, or Canada, or?
Type that into the chat.
Yeah, I think so. With regards to that, I was trying to find out if there's any updated information, and as best as I could determine, the rule still stands, that you have to be aware. And again, a lot of some of these things that I'm talking about are things that these are the laws and the rules. And can I guarantee that you'll be asked about it when you travel? No, I can't. But what I'm trying to do is convey the information that is the legalities of it. The one thing that I saw today was that if you had an either way, you should request the ability to enter the country if you have a prior DUI, and if it's a single DUI that happened a long time ago, it's probably something that you can navigate. If you have multiple DUIs, then it becomes more problematic.
And yes, that was for the US going into Canada, where it was 9 years following the last probation date.
And so, so can you read the original comment that person had?
Sure, yeah. DUI law, last I checked, was 9 years post last probation date, and a letter from the provincial government allowing you in.
Okay. So that's what that person obtained in order to make the crossing. Yeah.
Right, for an American going into Canada.
Yeah. And I'll relay a personal story that actually a relative of mine was driving to Canada a few years ago, probably within the last 5 years, I think, was driving to Alaska, but had to transit through Canada to get there. And they were stopped at the border, and they were not allowed to go into the country. And so that person actually had to stay on the US side, purchase an airline ticket to go to Alaska and leave his truck behind, and make the trip and then come back. So he's not a fan of Canada because of that. But it was, if he'd asked me, I could have told him ahead of time, but he didn't know that. So this was not a case of somebody flying in, but somebody that was driving across. But it's an example that they do check,
I'm laughing not at your relative, but just that the person in the chat, it was the X, thus the X.
Oh. Yeah, where was the person with the axe traveling?
We'll file this under play stupid games, win stupid prizes.
Yeah.
Oh, well, these things happen. And then there was just one other regarding the ForeFlight subscription. Someone had said that they know 3 others who are planning to go to Canada who are not on the webinar tonight, and they would definitely appreciate that short-term ForeFlight subscription.
Yeah, so as soon as I get confirmation of this, I will definitely, we'll publish, let people know how to obtain that. We're probably not going to put like a link that anybody can get. It's probably one of these things that I will need to provide them with a list of people maybe that are going, or that they will need to contact ForeFlight with the information. So, but once we get it sorted out, I'll let people know.
So you're all caught up on questions, and then there will be one more opportunity for questions at the end here.
Yep. All right, so now we're getting to the part where we're actually, you got all your ducks in a row and you're getting ready to fly, hopefully. So we're going to talk a little bit about flight plans and EAPIS. So EAPIS is the Electronic Advanced Passenger Information System, and this is through the Customs and Border Protection group. So first thing to remind you is make sure you got your Customs and Border Protection decal on your plane. So again, if you're thinking of doing this and you don't have one, buy it now. It's my understanding, so you can order it online, pay for it online, but it's my understanding it may take a few weeks to get sent out to you. Whether you're flying from the US to Canada or Canada back to the US, all flights have to be on a flight plan to cross the border, and it's utilizing the ICAO flight plans. If you're using ForeFlight, again, in this case, with a Canada subscription added on, you can actually file your flight plans electronically for both the US and within going into Canada and within Canada. So that's another good feature about if you're using ForeFlight. So you have to also, in addition to filing a flight plan, you also have to file your EAPIS document. Again, all online. So you must file EAPIS when you're going from the US into Canada. And also when you come back from Canada to the US, you need to file EAPIS. So this is alerting the US that your plane is leaving the US, going into Canada, or coming back into the US. One thing you could do now or anytime in advance, go in and create yourself an EAPIS account. So a username, a login. You can't possibly have enough passwords. Everybody needs more passwords and more logins, right? When you're preparing to cross the border, so let's say you stopped in Bellingham, Washington, and that's where you're going to make the jump off to Canada from. Enter your flight info into EAPIS at least 1 hour before you're planning to depart from the US or before you're planning to arrive back in the US. So you want to submit your EAPIS at least an hour ahead. You can actually submit it much earlier than that. But you want to make sure that you have accurate information to put in it. So you could file the EAPIS earlier and go back in and update it if you want. Maybe your departure date or time is going to change. But you have to do it at least an hour before. And you have to make sure you get a confirmation back from EAPIS that they have it, that they've received it. So you can't just hit send and then go hop in your plane. The EAPIS flight information is going to basically provide Customs and Border Protection with the information as to who's the crew, who are the passengers, what's your aircraft, and what's your trip information. It's pretty straightforward. It's pretty easy to file this document. Again, create your account now, and then you'll have it, and you'll use that for filing. So you're getting ready now to just kind of get in the plane and hop over to Canada. So what airports are going to use on each side of the border? So you can depart from the US at any airport. But again, before you depart, make sure you file EAPIS and make sure that you get the confirmation back from EAPIS that they have it, that it went through. Where are you going to arrive in Canada? So if you're going directly to the conference, Boundary Bay, the identifier is CZBB, Charlie Zulu, Bravo Bravo. That's the identifier for Boundary Bay. That's the GA airport to fly into. And it is what's called an airport of entry. So for some people, maybe they're going to cross over into Canada somewhere else, but you want to make sure that the airport that you're flying into is a recognized airport of entry. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. Unique features of Canada is that when you file a VFR flight plan in Canada, Canadian ATC assumes that you will depart as filed, and your flight plan will automatically open. You don't have to open it. Once you file a flight plan, ATC in Canada assumes that it opens when you said it's going to. And NAV Canada will initiate a search and rescue process if you are more than 30 minutes past your estimated arrival time. And I can guarantee you that happens, because on the air race, I was flying with Teresa White, and we were landing at the terminus in Welland, Ontario. And I had to do 2 go-arounds before I was able to land. And as I finally landed on that 3rd attempt, and was taxiing in at the terminus of the race, my phone rang, and it was Nav Canada asking me if I was on the ground, because I had given an arrival time, but I never included enough time thinking I'd have to do 2 go arounds. So they do respond within 30 minutes of that arrival time. Yeah, so if you don't fly, let's say you put in and you submitted a flight plan here in the US, you submit a flight time, and most of us don't do anything after that. If we don't fly, we don't worry about it because it expires. I think it's 2 hours after we said we were going to take off. So it doesn't open until you, in the US, it does not open until we contact them and open that flight plan with ATC. In Canada, it opens automatically. So if you don't fly, you need to make sure that you cancel that flight plan, because otherwise Canadian ATC is assuming you're in the air. And upon arrival at your destination, you want to be sure to call and report your arrival. So this is something you want to be sure that you take care of. That's a significant difference between the US and Canada. So CanPass is kind of the Canadian border customs thing. And so again, before you leave the US, when you're getting ready to make the hop into Canada, you want to call what's called CanPass. So you want to call 888 CanPass at least 2 hours and not more than 48 hours before you cross the border. So you should have an estimated crossing time for the border. When you call CanPass, they're going to give you an ID number, write it down, keep it, and you're going to give them that ID number when you arrive. So you're going to contact, when you get on the ground in Canada, you'll contact CanPass again, call that number, and you'll give them the ID number. Now in Boundary Bay, there's customs available, so a customs officer may meet you. So this image here on this, this is actually a screenshot from my phone showing the information. So if you are using ForeFlight, you can pull up an airport, go to the info tab, and then scroll down to what's called features. And you'll see whether the airport that you're focusing on is an airport of entry, and does it have customs available. So this is Boundary Bay here on the map. And it is an airport of entry, and it does have customs available. So more than likely, you'll be able to, maybe you'll see a customs officer. But in Canada, you can land at some airports of entry where customs is not available. And as long as it's an airport of entry, when you land, you would call this CanPass number, give them your ID number. They will look it up. They think they will give you another reference number that you've cleared customs. And it's as easy, it can be as easy as a phone call. So that's kind of what happens across the border. And so now I want to go back and so touch on this thing about service fees. And everybody has kind of this, you know, dire picture. It's like, oh, it costs money to fly and use the services up in Canada. If your aircraft weighs between 1360 and 4,410 pounds, you will only, as a foreign aircraft, you only have to pay the quarter that you use. So if you go up to Canada for Vancouver, the quarterly payment is good from June 1st to August 31st, and it costs $20.62 Canadian. That's the charge that will come in. Now, if you use tower services, there may be a little bit more tacked onto that, but it will, you know, I know when I flew the air race, because my plane partner, his address is what's on our plane, he got the bill for the times that I used, for all the air services that I used while I was up in Canada for the air race. I think it amounted to about $30 Canadian. So anyway, that kind of gives you an idea. Those service fees are not going to be, should not be oppressive or, super expensive by any means, I don't expect. The owner of the plane, who's on the FAA database, is probably the one who's going to get the invoice for the services from Nav Canada. So after you get back to the States, if you own the plane and your address is on there, you should get a bill. If you're flying somebody else's plane, they're going to get the bill. So you want to make sure you got, connect with them on that. And again, the payment can be made by credit card or other means. So it's pretty much a lot of different ways that you can pay it. But that's kind of how the service fees, my understanding of the service fees, how they work. So my question to you is also, once you've done all, you've jumped through all these hoops, you've got all the paperwork, you're ready to fly in Canada. And when I put the route together for the air race route in Canada, my challenge, to the air race kind of was, hey, these people are going to go to Welland and they've got to get all this paperwork in order. Let's fly in Canada. So, I guess that's my comment to people. If you're gonna fly to Vancouver, then heck, you might want to consider honing your skills for flying in Canada and take a hop somewhere. So you've done all that prep work, you're in Canada, it's, add to your adventure a little bit. And again, what you'll need to do is, you're going to get your weather briefing from Nav Canada to actually make a flight. And even coming back to the States, you're going to want to get your weather briefing. It's required to file the flight plan, file your flight plan with your ETA, and remember it opens automatically for the time that you scheduled for your departure. And if you don't fly, cancel your flight plan. And if you fly, be sure to close your flight plan and just enjoy your time. The picture that I put in here, I want to say, I think, well, I know this is a photo from the air race and it's coming into land, I think at North Bay. And I think it was a photo that, it's not my plane because it's got that diagonal strut there. So I know it's not my Cardinal. And I'm pretty sure it was shot by Gretchen John and Joanne Elkhorn, I think. Just to give them credit for that photo. So a little bit more information about Canadian flight operations. So again, Nav Canada is going to provide your flight and your weather services. In the Vancouver area, the Flight Information Center is, I believe, called Kamloops. The next slide will show you a map of how their flight information centers are set up. But the Vancouver area is kind of this one flight information center. Like any flight, you're going to want to review your aerodrome and your flight path information. Some non-towered airports, again, if you're flying elsewhere, so Boundary Bay is a towered airport, I believe. But if you're going to fly elsewhere, you may encounter some non-towered airports that have what are called mandatory frequency areas. And you have to file reports similar to CTAF. Like if I'm flying around Iowa City, there's no tower, I make my position reports, you're going to do the same thing. And in a mandatory frequency area, they're required. Other towered airports, they're not required. Other non-towered airports. But the mandatory frequency areas, they are required to make those reports. Again, if you want to get your weather briefing. So again, if you're going to fly somewhere in Canada or you're preparing to go back to the US, you want to call 866 weather brief in this case. And will connect you in to the flight information centers for your weather briefing. You want to file your ICAO flight plan. And then if you want to get on-route updates, you're going to call what are called RCOs, or remote communications outlets along your route. These are similar to our flight service stations over here. And then when you've landed, you're going to contact 866 weather brief again to close your flight plan. And that's kind of just the flow pattern for going through this. And so these are just some graphics. So Vancouver is located down here. So this is Canada, and it shows the I think there are 6 of them, the flight information centers where the RCOs are located. So it's Canada broken up into 6 areas. When we did the air race, we were in Ontario, so we were talking to London radio. So if you're in the Vancouver area, you're in what's called the Kamloops Flight Information Center area, so you'll be talking to Kamloops radio. And so within Kamloops radio, these are the different frequencies. You know, let's say you were going to make a hop over, so this is Vancouver down here. So Vancouver's located down here is Victoria. So if you're going to make a hop, let's say somewhere else out here, you talk to Kamloops radio and you dial in one of these frequencies for the area where you're located. Again, very similar to our flight service station areas when you're flying. And so if you're getting ready to depart and come back to the US, again, you have to make your first landing in the US at an airport of entry. So it has to be an airport of entry. What I've put over here in this image now is, this shows you, here's Bellingham, Washington, and here's Boundary Bay. So I'm not saying you have to use Bellingham, I'm just using it as a convenient example. You can choose another airport and we can talk about that. Bellingham is actually it's pretty busy airspace. They do not have a radar. So when airplanes, I don't know how many of you are used to that, but I've flown into airports where they have a tower, but they don't have a radar. And so they're visually sighting planes. So again, it's busy airspace and they have to visually sight planes. So you have to be cautious and keep your eyes out if you're going into an airport like Bellingham. You could go into any airport on the other side. I mean, you could basically extend this flight from Boundary Bay to somewhere more distant because you've got the fuel. You can land at another airport, but you need to actually check the info and the features to see if that airport that you want to land at is an airport of entry and do they have customs available. So that's what you have to make sure you check for. So, and the other difference is, you know, whereas before you called, you know, CanPass, when you depart, when you're getting ready to depart Canada, before you depart, you need to call the US Customs Office at the airport you're going to. So you're not calling some 1-800 number. You actually have to call and talk to the customs officer at the airport that you are planning to land at. And you have to give them an ETA that's at least 1 hour and not more than 23 hours before your expected time of arrival. So again, call the airport that you're going to. And after you land at the airport, you want to taxi to the customs area. And generally you remain inside the plane and you wait for the customs officer to come out and inspect your plane and direct you to exit the plane. I've crossed the border over in Port Huron in Michigan a number of times. And I personally, I've found the customs agents to be, you know, quite relaxed, and you know, they do come out and walk around my plane with Geiger counter, and then they let me out of the plane, and then I go in and chat with them and fill out my customs form and go off on my merry way. It's usually not a big deal, but you do have to call ahead of time. Like at Port Huron, actually, they have a customs available there, but generally the customs agents are over at a bridge a few miles away. And so that's why they need to know when you're coming in, because they're going to have to send an agent from their regular office at the bridge for land crossings out to the airport to meet up with you. So just kind of be aware that there's some logistics involved. And that's why you need to call these airports and set it up. So I've added a few resources here. The main resource that I would really encourage you, and what a lot of this presentation was put together based on, as well as my experiences, is a website that AOPA puts out, Flying to Canada. It's publicly available. You don't have to be a member to access it. But again, it's got like 6 tabs on it. So preparation for going, departure from the US, entry, while you're in Canada. It also has information if you're doing overflights and you're not actually landing in Canada, which I didn't talk about, and then also the return to the US. The video that I've listed here is actually a really good video. It's a few minutes long, but this, I can't remember the lady's name who put it together, but it's really a handy video. It walks you through the FCC website, and it'll walk you through as to how you would apply for the restricted radio operator's permit. The website here, it's a really lengthy link, but it's the FCC radio station and operator's license. What you're going to fill out is what's called a Form 605. It's used for both the operator's permit as well as the radio station. But anyway, just go out on the FCC website or Google some of these. You'll find these links pretty easily. The NAV Canada website, as well as Transport Canada, the aviation division. And I think that's all I got.
Okay. So we have several questions here. I'll try to take them somewhat according to topic. Going back to EAPIS, can that also be used by a Kiwi on a New Zealand passport?
Dee, you gotta give me these like complicated questions. Did you I guess I think you would. I think you would. Yeah, I think you would. I don't know for certainty the answer to that. But I'm going to ask, I know it's from Dee.
Yes.
So Dee, did you fly that air race into Canada? I guess maybe you didn't. If you don't, I don't know. Did you fly that race to Canada?
Into St. John, yes.
No, that's the one. Yeah, that was the one before that. That was only so that, and the St. John one probably predated EAPIS, I think. I don't know that. My guess is that you would, but I don't specifically know the answer to that.
She said she'd do some research. And someone had a comment here about EAPIS. I once used my second name in filing EAPIS, but my passport shows my first, second, last. Bellingham had heartburn with that when checking in after crossing back to the US. I got some questions just...
My guess is I would say if you're going... Yeah, so because it's Customs and Border Protection, I guess I would make sure that when you create your EAPIS account and file, I guess my recommendation would be to use your name as it shows on your passport.
If planning to go to Alaska before the conference, would you have to file in if you were going into Canada from continental US and another to go out to Alaska, and then back from Alaska to Canada and back to continental US?
Every time you cross the border and land, you would need to file EAPIS. So if you are flying from the US and you land in Canada, you have to file EAPIS. When you leave Canada and cross the border to Alaska, you would file EAPIS. And likewise, the return. If you're overflying, so here's the information about overflight. If you are flying from the US, from, let's say, Washington State, and you could fly without stopping and land in Alaska with no stop in Canada, you can do an overflight without filing. You would not have to file EAPIS. No, you don't have to file EAPIS. So, for instance, I fly from Iowa City to Syracuse, New York. And sometimes, often, I actually take the northern route, which takes me north of the lake, and I'm flying over Canadian. So sometimes I leave, let's say, Port Huron, Michigan. That's my fuel stop. I take off from Port Huron, Michigan, and then I fly north of the lake to Syracuse, New York. And I'm talking to ATC in both Canada and the US, but I'm never landing there, and I don't file EAPIS. So if you take off from the US, overfly Canada without stopping, and land in the US, you don't have to file EAPIS. But if you take off from the US and land in Canada, you have to file EAPIS.
Okay. Someone had a comment about expect someone may meet you at your plane when you first land in Canada and interrogate you kind of like when you cross the border in a car.
Is that a question?
No, that was just a comment.
Oh,
yeah. There are a few questions.
my experience has been that, I mean, number one, I've actually crossed into Canada and done just a telephone thing. Yeah, I think they just ask for, like, you know, what are you there for? And, you know, when you're leaving type thing. Yeah, they're pretty basic questions. I've always found the Canadian customs, and actually my experience with the US customs has always been quite positive. So.
Indeed, agreed. If you know, due to headwinds, et cetera, that you will be late, how long can you extend the arrival time?
So that's the reason for the en route. Let's see, I don't know, where did I talk about that? Here we go. So down here where it talks about en route updates. So let's say you take off from the US, you're talking to, you have to be on a squawk code. So you're going to be talking to somebody. When you leave the US to go to Canada, and when you leave Canada to come back to the US, you are going to be talking to ATC, even on a VFR plan. And you will be on, you have to have a discrete squawk code. And so because you'll be talking to ATC, and even if you're making a flight within Canada, let's say you're going to do a little internal hop somewhere, and you file that flight plan, but hey, you got headwinds or whatever, so yeah, my flight's going to be longer. Talk to the RCO, or the remote communications outlet, which again is kind of like our flight service station, and that's where you can get en route weather updates, but that's where you can also update your arrival time. So if your arrival time is going to change and you're going to exceed that 30-minute wait period, I would just let them know up front. Just say, oh, I'm going to be 15 minutes late or something, and this is my new estimated time of arrival. And that's what these, you know, RCOs, you know, these are the local frequencies you'd call, and in the Vancouver area, you'd be talking to this Kamloops radio. You'd say Kamloops radio, you know, November 1351 Charlie. I'd like to update my arrival time, and I'll be arriving, you know, 30 minutes later or something like that.
There was a question, are the Flight Information Center frequencies listed on the Canadian charts?
Yep, so the charts are very similar to ours. You know, they're going to look a little different, but the charts are very similar. And again, if you have, I don't want to keep referencing ForeFlight, but again, the information is pretty similar between the two. And yeah, so the frequencies are on the charts.
And then regarding IFR flight plans, are they automatically closed at towered airports like they are in the US?
No, because what you have to do is you have to, you know, in order to close your plan, you have to contact that one, you know, that weather brief number. So upon landing, you need to call this 866 weather brief to close your flight plan. And if you're talking to a tower, I guess that it may be if you're talking to tower that they would close it, but I would confirm that.
Okay. Question about if I'm just flying the patch around with friends at an airport in Canada, do I need a flight plan taking off and landing at the same private airport?
I think if you're staying within 25 miles, you don't have to. If you're going further than 25 miles, I think you do.
And somebody confirmed that towered airports will close IFR flight plans.
Good. What about via? So they confirmed they would close IFR flight plans. My guess is they would also close a VFR flight plan.
Negative.
That was a no, they won't?
No, they will not.
Interesting.
Regarding briefings,
so let me go back up to that, whoever's communicating with you on that. My question would be, if you are flying to Boundary Bay, which has a tower, you're on a VFR plan, you've got a squawk code in there, and so you land at Boundary Bay talking to that tower, which is in the Vancouver General Airspace area, but you're talking to Boundary Bay's tower, they would not close a VFR flight plan?
Well, this person said it depends. You can ask, but if they are busy.
Okay. So yeah, you want to get a confirmation that it's closed. And then, of course, it never hurts to call the number and just close it.
Yeah, when in doubt. Yeah, you can do that in the US. In the US, we have those apps that you can close it too. It can be easy.
And it may be possible that you can do it, so I would explore. Nav Canada has a good, there's a weather website type thing, and you might want to explore the Nav Canada website a little bit, because it may be possible to close it online. I'm not sure now. I mean, it's different from when I flew the race 5 years ago.
Do we need two briefings, one for the Canadian portion and one for the US, or one briefing for the entire flight?
So if you're flying from the US to Canada, I think you can get, in terms of a weather briefing, I think that would be what you need. And then you would also have filed with CanPass that you're coming in. So as long as, in terms of weather briefing, you just want to make sure you have the appropriate weather covering the area that you're going to fly in. But again, you still have to contact CanPass that you're flying in there. I think you just have to file the one flight plan that would, take you, again, I just use as an example, Bellingham, say, to Boundary Bay.
Okay. And then one question regarding the short-term ForeFlight subscription. What's the best way to find out if we can get that?
So that's something that I'm talking with ForeFlight about now. So if we get that, it's going to be kind of a group thing. And so if we get it, I would work out the details of it with ForeFlight as to how people would obtain that. And then I would communicate that with people going to the conference. Yeah.
I think that is all the questions.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Minnetta. That was extremely informative. And like you said, there'll be more information coming before we get to the summer.
One thing, let me, just one quick thing. I'm going to stop share here, and I'm going to put up that other screen very quickly. So just very quickly, I know there's a lot of information on these slides. And what I've put together is we did a similar type document for the air race, and I've modified it. And so what I've created here is kind of this flight, checklist, if you will, that kind of goes through some of the details that we've talked about this evening. And so basically it's set up as flight preparation. So things to do before you fly, getting ready for going to Vancouver, things to do for departure going into Canada from a US airport, a little thing here about flying in Canada. The maps that this map that I showed you for the RCOs, and circled in here the Vancouver area. And then lastly, the return to the US. So this document, again, you can clearly see it's a draft, but it's pretty much complete. This is a document that once I finalize it, we'll put it up on the conference website as a PDF. So it'll provide people with kind of a little bit of a checklist to be able to go over as they prepare to make a flight into Canada. So.
And we are going to, I said this before, we are going to have a recording of this webinar posted. So if anyone wants to review the information again, just give us about a week or so, and we'll have that up on both the 99's website and our YouTube channel. So Minnetta has referenced the Air Race Classic a few times tonight, and which is the perfect segue to our next webinar, which will be on March 13th. And that will be called Air Race Classic. What is air racing all about? And the air race is not going into Canada this year. It's mostly throughout the Midwest. But we'll have some information in case you're considering doing the air race this year. And Minnetta, you're getting many, many thank yous here, including best webinar ever. Good to have you back.
I don't know about that, but yeah, I hope everybody enjoyed it, and I hope the information, I hope most of it at least is accurate that I gave guys.
You did get a kudos from someone from Canada who says, I listened in case we go through the States before going to Boundary Bay, picked up some pointers, looking forward to meeting many of you. And that is from Mary Norman. So
yeah, I think I saw, is Teresa White on this webinar still? I wanted to give, Teresa is retired from working with the FAA, but she did talk to people in Bellingham. Teresa, did you want to say a few words about Bellingham?
Well, I don't know too much yet. I shared with you all I knew, like the fact that they don't have radar. They are busy. They have several commercial flights going in there, 3 major airlines. And they are short-staffed right now, and they have been for several months now. I don't know if it will be the same in July or not. I shared the information, the dates about the conference with the airport ops manager and asked him to share it with ATC, but I don't know if that got done or not, but we'll keep working on that.
Yeah, so I don't want to dissuade anybody from, like, I'm not saying don't go to Bellingham. I just want you to be aware that it is, the airspace can be busy. And Teresa had shared that the tower, is kind of short staffed. So I just wanted people to be aware of that. I've actually, I haven't landed my plane. When I flew back, the woman that I flew to Greenland with, she was based in Bellingham. And so I flew all the way back to Bellingham with her and landed. It is a beautiful airport. It's a beautiful area. One of the things you might want to do if you're out there flying is take the occasion to fly around the islands out there. It's very cool. So anyway, that's all I'll say about that.
Thanks, Caitlin. And thank you, Minnetta. And thank you everyone for joining us tonight. And we'll see you in March.
See you guys.
Thanks, Minnetta.